What's up guys, Tommy Bowyer here from Movie Rewind, and today we will be reviewing Casino Royale. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, Casino Royale was directed by Martin Campbell, released in 2006, and is the first James Bond film to star Daniel Craig in the title role. Now, I would say the majority of people would say that Casino Royale had a lot riding on it because it was supposed to bring a freshness and a new lease of life for the James Bond character, which has of course been running since the early 1960s. So it was very important for Casino Royale to make a James Bond film which could be ready for the 21st century and capture the hearts and minds of audiences once more. And I would say the majority of people believe that Casino Royale was a significant success with fans and critics alike. Loads of people love this film and it's often ranked as one of the strongest James Bond films. Today we'll be looking at some of the reasons why this film proved to be such a success. So in terms of character development, this film actually does something which a lot of James Bond films fail to do. They actually give James Bond proper character development, because if you go back to the days of Sean Connery and Roger Moore, you really do notice that James Bond might be this cool, womanizing badass. However, he doesn't really have a lot of development given to his character. In this film, that's very different, because James Bond is a very different character at the end of this film as when he started off, because we're going back to a time when James Bond has just got his 00 status and his license to kill, and you really see him develop as a character. I love the romance between James Bond and Vesper Lynd in this film. It's James Bond falling in love properly for the first time, and you really see the consequences of that romance, how James Bond becomes this more cold and isolated figure, and I think that works really well. The development done for other characters, as I've already mentioned, Vesper Lynd is one of the best Bond girls, and her development done to her character is done really well. She's not just this object which a lot of previous James Bond films used women as. She's actually a very developed and rounded character. And the villain, oh my god, one of the strongest villains in any James Bond film. You really do see this guy's sense of desperation. He wants to win the money or he's going to be hunted down, so you feel that sense of desperation. So all of the development of the characters are done really well in this film. So I would give character development a 10 out of 10 because they're all done really well and they have a lot of depth to them. As for the performances, well, they are outstanding. Daniel Craig as James Bond, he is one of the best actors to portray James Bond because he understands the character very well and he shows a lot of different sides to the character, whether that's the ruthless James Bond, the cool James Bond, or actually something that was quite new in this film, that he sees a more vulnerable side to James Bond. There's a great scene in this film when James Bond is cleaning his wounds after getting in this very violent fight in a casino, and it's something you've never really seen in a James Bond film before, to see Bond look that vulnerable. And I would say that's down to Daniel Craig's performance, because he can just show off this range. He has such a great range in terms of acting abilities, and he's great as James Bond. Eva Green as Vesper Lynd, as I've already mentioned, is one of the best Bond girls because she's not just an object for James Bond to use. She's a brilliant actress and she has a lot of depth to her character, which I found really interesting. And Craig and Green have fantastic chemistry on screen, which really does make you feel that there is love between James Bond and Vesper Lynd. And Mads Mikkelson as Le Chiffre, the villain, is such an underrated villain. I don't think people talk enough about the villain in Casino Royale, because Le Chiffre, in my personal opinion, is one of the best, because he's not just this world-dominating villain who's over the top. No, he's a very complex character. You understand that he is desperate and needs to get this money now, or he is going to be hunted down and killed himself. So there's a lot of tension here, and you understand why the villain is doing what he's doing, which is always important for a villain in a film. Overall, all of the performances in this film are great. They're at the top of their game. The standout performances, I would say, is Daniel Craig, Eva Green and Mads Mikkelson, because they bring everything to their roles. So I'm going to give the performances a 10 out of 10 because they are all fantastic and I can't really fault any of them. The effects in this film are really strong because there's a lot of practical effects, which I prefer. I think they look a lot more realistic than CGI effects, as they're all done practically. Daniel Craig does a lot of the stunts himself, which is something to admire. And I would say the effects in this film feel really down to earth and gritty. And that's another thing I would say. A lot of the action in this film is very well choreographed, and that the fact that it feels a lot more gritty and brutal than in any previous or succeeding James Bond films, and I think that's something to really admire here. I loved the choreography in this film, and all the action's very gritty, and the practical effects I would say are really strong. I can't see any effects in this film which I think are weak in any way. They still all hold up, and they're done really well. So the effects get a 10 out of 10 because I can't really fault them. So in terms of the story and writing, this film is well paced. When you sit down and watch this film, the time flies by, which is great. This film is a very traditional 3-act structure to it. The first act is all about stopping certain terrorist events from taking place and trying to figure out why these terrorist events are happening. The second act is all about the casino and the high stakes poker game, which is a lot of suspense and tension during that scene, which is fantastic. And the third act is all about trying to discover actually who is behind all these events and can Vesper Lynd actually be trusted. And as to say, there's a lot of twists and turns in this film. Le Chiffre, the main villain, is killed at the end of Act 2, and he's not even killed by James Bond, which for many, a lot of older James Bond films, the film ends with like this massive fight scene between James Bond and the main villain. That doesn't happen in Casino Royale. The main villain is killed at the end of the second act, and then it's all about trying to discover, well, actually, who is behind this and can Vesper Lynd actually be trusted, which I think is done really well. I would say that there are 3 scenes in this film which stand out for me as a viewer. The first is the poker game scene. Such a suspenseful scene between James Bond and Le Chiffre, and seeing which one can outdo the other is done fantastic. The second scene, which is really strong, is of course when James Bond tries to save Vesper Lynd and fails and Vesper dies. Such a brilliantly acted scene. Daniel Craig was great in this scene and shows emotion which you wouldn't really associate with James Bond as a character. And the third scene, my favourite scene in any James Bond scene, is the torture scene with James Bond when Le Chiffre is trying to get the passcode out of him and is whacking him while he's... Such a great and suspenseful scene. You feel every whack that Le Chiffre gives James Bond, and it really, once again, it portrays Daniel Craig's acting talents really well. The man is such a talented actor and a great asset to the James Bond character. So I'm going to give the story and writing a 10 out of 10 because it's done really well. It's well paced, it has a lot of action and suspense in it, and it has some really standout moments. So for this film's special recognition, as it's a James Bond film, I've got to talk about the theme. Now, You Know My Name by Chris Cornell is a fantastic James Bond theme, and I think it's very underrated. It kicks off Daniel Craig's era in such a great way, because when you're listening to this song during the opening credits, you're getting pumped and ready for the film, and you can't wait for it to start. And that's exactly what a James Bond theme is supposed to do, and You Know My Name is a great example of that. It's one of my favourite, if not my favourite, James Bond themes of all time. And for that theme, I'm going to give a 10 out of 10 because it is fantastic, and Chris Cornell, you are a legend. So in conclusion, Casino Royale has outstanding performances, a well-paced story with strong suspenseful scenes as well as great action, and also it has an amazing theme in the form of You Know My Name by Chris Cornell, and that is why Casino Royale gets a very well-deserved 50 out of 50, which gives it a grade 1 ranking. Honestly, Casino Royale was such a fresh take on the James Bond character. It will always be my favourite James Bond film, and it really does show Daniel Craig at his best and why he is such a great actor and probably one of the best actors to ever portray James Bond. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do hope that you enjoyed my Casino Royale movie review. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. And I'm sorry if it looks dark in this room right now. It's because I recorded it on Sunday evening, so the light has to be on, otherwise it'd be pitch black. So I am sorry about that. And of course, I've reviewed Casino Royale because I'm reviewing every Daniel Craig James Bond film in the coming week. So I hope you stay tuned for that because I'm really looking forward to doing it. And I hope you guys enjoy them as well. And I will see you in another one. See ya!